We are humans, and we are not supposed to be churning out creative outputs 24/7. We are not robots. We are not machines. We are humans, and we are supposed to rest.
Welcome to Spill the Creativity Podcast, the podcast where we will be having conversations with other creatives that will inspire us, keep us encouraged, and push us to reach our own goals. This is the place where we will be acknowledging the hard truths because while this path is fulfilling, the truth is there's no easy way to do things. It all takes hard work. We are going to be talking about the good and the bad about choosing a creative career. If you're looking for a cup of stimulation for creatives, a warm cup of tea in this otherwise bittersweet pursuit, then you're in the right place. So let's get that cup of tea and get on with the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spill the Creativity Podcast. And I know it has been around 2 months since the last time I put out any content in here and in any of my social media accounts because I have been in a creative rut for those 2 long months. And that is like the longest time I've kind of disappeared from everyone. And I want to talk about that today because as creative entrepreneurs, well, any entrepreneur for that matter, we always experience the highs and lows of it. And I'm not just talking about, like the highs and lows from the financial aspect, but also from a creative perspective. There are just times when you don't want to create anything or you're just really not in your creative zone. And the last 2 months, I've experienced the worst creative dry spell ever. And it kind of sucks because I have built all these systems for me to have a content calendar. I have templates. I asked my friend Nemo to collaborate with me and I purchased like one of her services where we put together these really cute templates. And even if I had those really cute templates, I still didn't want to make anything. I have prompts. Like I signed up for all these courses and coaches and like they have these prompts so that we can use when, like this happens. But for some reason, even if I have all those tools, I just really don't want to do anything. I didn't want to show up. It just did not feel right. And it even came to a point where I had to force myself to create something just so, like I don't disappear from the internet completely. And the output just seems so half-assed. I'm not sure if you can feel it, but I can feel it. I know like there was something wrong in there. I can't pinpoint what it was exactly. It's just that it just really did not feel right. And I'm not sure if you know that feeling, but yeah, that was what I felt. And so today, the fact that I'm recording this podcast kind of means that I'm finally out of that rut. And I want to share the things that I've learned from when I was in that season with you guys. So when I was experiencing that creative dry spell, I really did try to like ignore it and shrug it off and just still try to come up with something. And as I mentioned earlier, it just didn't feel right. It felt half-assed and it just felt wrong. So there are three things that I have learned from that experience. And the first one is that when you are going through a creative rut, it is very tempting to ignore it, to resist it, and just go on with the status quo. But sometimes the best thing to do is to not resist it and just go through it, bask in it, feel it, be familiar with it. Because again, we are humans and we are not supposed to be churning out creative outputs 24/7. We are not robots. We are not machines. We are humans and we are supposed to rest, like we're supposed to have space to connect with ourselves again so we can create better things. And I would say that familiarizing yourself with this feeling would kind of help you understand this creative low when it happens again. Because, spoiler alert, this will not be the last time that you'll be feeling uninspired or just not want to do anything. There are seasons, and our creativity is part of that season as well. It's not always summertime for our creativity. Sometimes our creativity has to go through winter. And, well, in the Philippines, there's no winter, but technically when it's the cold or like when it's the rainy season, That's a time when we introspect. So when you are in a creative rut, think of it as like you being in the winter or like in the rainy season. And maybe there's something that needs to be learned in all that. And sometimes I'd like to think of this creative rut as like an annoying relative that you have to meet up with at least once a year. I'm talking about that annoying tita that you see in birthday parties or family reunions or those occasional times when we see them. We all don't like her, but she's part of the family and she's going to be there whether we like it or not. So just maybe acknowledge her, I don't know, and let her do her thing because at this point, there is no more point in resisting. We just kind of have to let her be. Which leads me to lesson learned number two, which is try to learn from the experience. I mean, now that you have familiarized yourself with this feeling, try to see if there is a lesson that can be learned from this whole thing. I know I mentioned that earlier, but this is like a separate segment for that because it is also important to kind of understand where this rut came from. Could it be that you're just tired and you need a break? Or could it be that you need new inspiration? Perhaps knowing the answers to these questions would help you manage this feeling better the next time it shows up. Or perhaps knowing the answers would make the impact not as intense as you're feeling it now. And going back to the annoying relative analogy, once you know the reason why she's there, it will help you understand and it will help you manage her the next time she shows up again. I don't know about you, but when I have like awkward family reunions, when I kind of know where that relative is coming from or I try to be more empathetic with her, it kind of makes it easier to deal with it. Well, it's different for everybody, but yeah. And that's kind of how I deal with it. And that's also how I dealt with my creative rut. I really tried to understand why was I feeling that way? Why am I not inspired? Why am I so uninspired? So I kind of really have to sit with those thoughts and I journaled so hard. I tried to figure out where it came from, what could have caused this. I found out that the reason why I was stuck is because I was being so hard on myself in a way. Like I had a bad experience, and that bad experience translated to how I do things creatively. And so finding the root cause or like really finding the reason and the lesson behind it made me understand why I was in that situation. That's how I sort of like started to work towards finding my creative groove again. Which leads me to the third lesson learned, which is to prepare for it the next time. I mean, now that you are familiar with the feeling and that you have learned from it, it's time to start preparing for when it shows up again. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, as humans, we are always going to experience this kind of rut. We are not going to be creative all the time. And so as expected, this season is going to arrive again, maybe sometime this year, or maybe if you're lucky, you're going to experience it again next year. So how I would prepare for this would be to know my creative rituals. What brings me back to the zone? And that may look different for everyone. It could be that you need a break from all social media, listen to your favorite music, journal, go on a retreat, know your creative rituals, and make time and space for them. In my case, I had to stop listening to anything self-help. I stopped listening to self-help podcasts. I stopped reading self-help books. I stopped watching self-help YouTube. I stopped consuming content about productivity and efficiency and all that stuff. I felt like exposing myself to those kinds of content kind of suffocated me and it felt like I'm trying too hard to be somebody that I'm not. So I stopped consuming all those kinds of content and started to listen to things that are fun and light, something that I would say like something I can consume mindlessly, something that I could enjoy fully. So I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of romance novels. I listened to a lot of pop music. I love pop music. I listened to my favorite songs from when I was in high school. So that's a lot of Boys Like Girls. That's Justin Bieber. And yeah, I felt like I just kind of had to connect with my inner child and, like connect with the things that really made me happy. So I also took up weaving classes, So I'm not sure if I've mentioned it here in the podcast, but apart from like being a podcast manager, another thing that I used to I still identify myself with is that I am a yarn artist. So it has been a while since the last time I have taken any yarn related classes. So when there was an opportunity, I took a refresher course for weaving and I started weaving again. I did not have a creative ritual, apparently, but what I learned is that whenever I would be in a creative rut, is that the best thing for me to do at least is to connect with my inner child and to just enjoy creating things again, because I learned ultimately that what pressured me or like what hindered me from being creative again is the fact that I create things for money. I don't know if that is coming across correctly. I felt like I just needed to make things just for the sake of it. Like I don't have to think about whether this product is sellable, whether this product is scalable. I just have to make things, and it didn't have to be perfect. It didn't have to address the needs and wants of my market. I just had to make something that would make me happy. And yeah, I guess my learning from this is that when I see myself in a creative rut again, it's a sign that I have to reconnect with that inner child. I have to reconnect with that artist who just wants to create just for the sake of creating and not for, profit. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we just have to create just for the sake of creating. And okay, I know that I said that we are going to talk about this not from a financial perspective, but let's be real. Our creative rot will have an effect on our finances, especially if the business model that you have is highly dependent on your ability to make things. And so I guess this goes without saying that this is one of the things that we should prepare for. Perhaps it's time to build an emergency fund for your business so that when the low seasons happen, when you don't feel called to create things, to create new things or any of that, you won't be too stressed because you know that your business will still float because you have an emergency fund. Or maybe that means that you have to double down on generating leads or putting together a wait list so that when you are experiencing this kind of low season, you know that you have potential clients lined up. And I know that these things may seem a lot, especially when you are listening to this while you are in the middle of a creative rut. Believe me, I understand. Like I said, mine lasted for 2 painful months before I realized that there was no point in resisting. And yeah, like I mentioned a while ago as well, when I was in the middle of my creative rut, I was not listening to any podcasts or anybody who could talk some sense into me because I know that I really would not listen. And it was just the time for me to connect with myself and listen to myself and figure things out for myself. I knew that I had to go through this to learn a few things. And perhaps I had to go through this rut to share some of my learnings with you. And yeah, just to recap, here are the 3 things that I learned from going through my creative dry spell. Number 1, don't resist it when you're going through it. Number 2, try to learn from the experience. And number 3, prepare for the next time it shows up again. So yeah, that's all for this episode. I hope you learned something from this. And yeah, now that I'm back, I can confidently say that I'll see you again next week for more creative tea to be spilled. Bye!
Thanks again for listening to Spill the Creativity podcast. If you like this episode, I would really appreciate it if you can give me a 5-star rating on Spotify and a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. Or you can also take a screenshot and tag me on Instagram at Spill the Creativity Podcast, and you can also try the special filters if you want. Thanks again for listening to this episode, and make sure to catch fresh drops every Thursday morning. Bye!